Please take your seats because we're going to start the next act of this conference with another wonderful piece by Missing Pieces.
There are a few issues as taboo or as emotionally charged as the subject of sex offenders, and particularly those who prey on children. Our legal system deals with them ruthlessly, doling out penalties that are second only to murder charges. In some states, the sentencing can be as severe as life without parole, or even the death penalty in Florida. And while no one would argue with the importance of protecting children from sexual offenders, there are ambiguities that come up that are difficult to address, precisely because it is such an inflammatory subject. One example is the question of treatment. Many of the punishments for sex offenders drive them out of their homes and communities and offer no options for treatment, rehabilitation, or reintegration. Many people believe that there is no treatment possible or that it isn't worth the risk. But new areas of research are being explored to manage how pedophiles might be able to redirect their sexual desires using virtual reality and robotics. Some say this could be a healthy way to live out fantasies without inflicting harm on real children. Others fear that legal virtual child pornography will only encourage the possibility of real-life sexual assault. While we may not have any answers, we can still ask ourselves whether this research should be continued, and if we are at least open to having the conversation.
So welcome back from lunch, everyone. If you attend a lot of conferences, as I do, you know that this slot immediately after lunch is the slot that's really hard to speak in because everyone just wants to be having the conversation they were having over lunch. Everyone's in a food coma. And so we thought we would complicate matters by taking both the hardest slot to fill in a conference and then taking on perhaps the most fraught topic that we're going to work on today. You'll remember that when I started this, I said that part of our goal in all of this was to make sure that we made everybody in the room uncomfortable. My guess is that this topic is going to get a lot of people on that front. One of the big things that we're going to talk about here is paraphilia. We're going to talk about sexual deviance. We're going to talk about the problem of people whose sexual desires lead to attraction to children, lead to attraction towards violent sex, lead to sexual transgression in one fashion or another. To be really clear, we're not showing explicit imagery in this panel, but this is a panel that may well be triggering for people. If you're a survivor of sexual assault, if this is an issue that you know that you have a hard time with, it's a beautiful day. I would encourage you to enjoy the balcony, to have another conversation, to take a break for about an hour. But we're going to try to deal with this very challenging topic because it's a topic that has lots of real-world implications. There's something like 11,000 registered sex offenders in the state of Massachusetts. There are 1,300 at the moment serving time for sex crimes. Perhaps most challenging, there are several hundred people in this state who are in indefinite civil confinement. And the reason for this is that these are sex offenders who have completed their prison sentences, but there are concerns about releasing them into the general population because there's fears of recidivism. Professor Arkin and I have been really trying to research this question of what are the statistics on recidivism, what's the rate on this. We, just doing some Googling over dinner last night, found numbers ranging from 10% to 50% for convicted pedophiles, which suggests more than anything else that there just isn't a ton of research on this. When you have a range that wide, it suggests that we know very little indeed. One thing that we do know from research in this field is that most people who are afflicted with pedophilia are actively trying to fight these urges. And when they talk to therapists, what they end up saying is that they're trying very, very hard not to act on the urges that they're suffering from, and they do describe it as suffering from. And so the topic that we're looking at, which is really this question of whether there are ways of treating paraphilias with computer imagery, with virtual reality, possibly with intimate robotics, which is a term that I hadn't heard until the other day. This is the topic that we're going to try to take on here. So it's a challenging topic. We're lucky to have an incredible set of people willing to take on this issue here with us on stage. To the very far side of me, my friend Dr. Kate Darling. She's a legal scholar who looks at a wide variety of subjects, but lately has been looking at sort of real-world implications of human-robot interactions, and not looking to the distant future in Asimov's law, but really looking at right now, what are we doing in our interactions with robots? How does this work? How do we interact with one another? Slightly closer, my colleague and friend Christina Couch, who works in the Comparative Media Studies Department, is also an accomplished technology journalist and freelance writer who has written on this question of computer imagery, virtual reality, and how it fits in with questions of paraphilias. And then immediately to my left, Professor Ron Arkin from the Georgia Tech College of Computing. He's someone who's done extensive work on robotics and robot ethics. And while he's normally someone that we bring to the table to talk about questions like autonomous killer robots, he's also someone who's going to talk with us on this subject as well. But since Dr. Darling put this panel together, she's going to lead us off.
Don't worry, I don't have any slides. So as Ethan mentioned, I'm a researcher here at the lab, and I wear two different hats. But something that I'm very intensely interested in is the field of human-robot interaction. So the study of how we behave around robots. And I would say that the single most fascinating thing to me about robots is that people will treat them as though they're alive. Now, of course, everyone knows that robots are just machines, they're just programmed to do things. But subconsciously, when we interact with robots, we treat them as though they're alive. And for many of us who work in human-robot interaction, a lot of us believe that this isn't just a matter of people getting used to a new technology that they're unaccustomed to, but rather something that's biological. So our brains may be biologically hardwired to project intent and life onto any movement in our physical space that seems autonomous to us. And there's a whole body of research that is documenting how strongly we respond to the cues that these lifelike machines give us. And the reason that this is cool is because it gives us this really interesting lens through which we can study human psychology. So, for example, I did a study here at the Media Lab with Palash Nandi where we found that people who have low empathic concern for others, they will treat a robot differently than people who have high empathic concern. So we can use robots to measure human empathy. And in this context, robots, the fact that people treat them sort of like a living thing makes them potentially a really great tool to study and explore sexual behaviors and sexual urges and try to understand those better. And that in itself is very useful as a research question since we know so little about this. But there are actually more questions that I'm interested in. So one thing that I want to know is not just, can we measure or observe people's behavior with robots, but can we change it? So could we use robots therapeutically to help people manage their behavior, control their urges, that type of thing? And another question I have, which I think is very important, is once child-sized sex robots hit the market, which they will, is the use of these robots going to be a healthy outlet for people to, express these sexual urges and thus protect children and reduce child abuse? Or is the use of these robots going to encourage, normalize, propagate that behavior and endanger children in these people's environments? And we just don't know the answer to this. We have no idea what direction this goes in, and we can't research it. Because aside from the fact that there's this incredible social stigma, of course, to doing work like this or even talking about it, and not to mention the lack of research funding, there are also reporting requirements in the United States that make it virtually impossible to work with people who haven't already been convicted of sex crimes and often have been in jail for them. So you have a very difficult and very skewed sample of the population that we need to be studying. And I understand why people want reporting requirements, but I do wonder whether they're doing more harm than good in these cases, because as much as people want these sexual urges, the urges, not the act, to be a moral failing, they are a psychological issue. And if we really care about helping children, we might need to be a little bit more preemptive about this. So I'll just finish by saying that courts all over the world have been struggling since the early mid-2000s with the question of virtual child pornography, so computer-generated images that aren't actual children. Courts don't know what to do with these because no child has been harmed in making them. And the technology that brings this to a more extreme, more physical, more real level is on the horizon. And while high-quality sex robots are not actually coming as quickly as many people think they are coming more quickly than society is willing to have this conversation. So I'm very grateful to be here today in a room full of really smart people who care about making the world a better place to discuss this very sensitive, very difficult, and I think very important issue.
Because I'm asking Kate a question. So, Kate, I just want you to unpack something a little bit because it went by very quickly. Child pornography ends up being prohibited for at least two reasons. One is that we don't think such a thing should exist, or that's been a societal decision. But the more important reason in many ways is that a child is harmed and exploited in the course of producing these images. 3D modeling, the ability to create digital imagery, starts raising this possibility of virtual child pornography. What's US law's take on this thus far? And are there other jurisdictions, because you're not just a lawyer, but an international legal scholar, are there other jurisdictions that have ended up handling this issue of virtual child porn differently?
Yeah, so it's complicated. In the United States, we had, I think in '96, an act that forbade computer-generated images of children. And the Supreme Court struck that down in, let's see, do you remember when it was?
It's 2002.
In 2002, the Supreme Court said that there was a fundamental free speech issue if you're criminalizing just computer-generated images and not, an act that actually harms people. And so they ended up striking down two of the provisions of this act. Since then, there's been a new act called Protect that was passed, which now prohibits computer-generated images or cartoons or whatever. It actually explicitly says cartoons, but only if they're obscene. Mm-hmm. So they've kind of shifted the child piece away from the child piece towards obscenity, which is a very convoluted, very complicated thing that's not well defined and kind of depends on community standards. So the US has struggled because we have such strong First Amendment rights. Other countries have flat out banned this, like Germany, I believe. And then other countries like Holland have just struggled with cases where they want to ban it, so they find some other reason. Like there was a video that was teaching young girls to perform fellatio, and they ended up criminalizing that based on the fact that it was targeted at young girls and trying to teach them improper behaviors or undesirable behaviors, rather than the fact that it was a cartoon that depicted girls. So it's very complicated, and I think courts haven't figured out a good way to strike that balance.
So I think we're gonna get back to this question of what the legal status is, but we're also gonna be wrestling with this question of what is exploitative of children and what is something that's illegalized because it's uncomfortable, it's socially undesirable, and how does that work in with questions of what might be therapeutic, what might be helpful. But I want to pass it to Professor Arkin.
Thank you. I do have slides. I gave a talk just recently in Italy with a paper written jointly with a colleague of mine from Georgia Tech, a philosopher named Jason Borenstein. But I'm not going to give that talk here. I'm just to let you know that I have a few things I've reused from them. And I've been involved quite some time. I've been a roboticist for close to, or maybe even over 30 years as well, too. And I do work in sex, lies, and violence, I guess is the best way to describe it. There's plenty of money in some ways for dealing with lethal autonomous weapon systems and doing the U.S. Department of Defense doesn't do that specifically, but I work on ethical aspects of that, but that's neither here nor there for today. I also, supposedly, according to, that was New York Magazine, taught robots how to lie at one point, and that got us a small piece on The Daily Show, among other things as well, in terms of the questions of what are you doing with these sorts of things. But we weren't forbidden, and we're still doing work in robot deception. But I'm not talking about that today. What I am talking about is a place where there is no money to be able to get this kind of research, which is in the broader aspects of this. And so this notion of intimate robotics, which actually is an outgrowth of work that Genevieve Bell at Intel did many years ago in a UBICOM conference in intimate computing. I know there was some work here in the Media Lab also that was portrayed in that case, deals with more than just sex. Sex toys and sex machines have been around since and women have been around as well, too. That's nothing new. That's not what I'm worried about. And this is my second greatest concern with the impacts upon society. The first, again, is the lethal autonomous weapon systems, which is happening now. This one is about to happen or is happening as we go. But I worked with Sony for 10 years and Sony Aibo with the Curio as well, too, which are these small platforms and have patents in human and robot emotions as well, too. So the question is, we know how to, and you guys know as well too, at least many here, know how to make people fall in love with these kinds of platforms. Now, for a small dog, you can talk about pet psychotherapy and other aspects as well too, where there are clearly beneficial roles. But what if we start doing it where we cross this proxemic boundary instead of socio-consultative space or familiar space, but we get into the intimate space where these systems start to engage with us more and more deeply? And so there are many questions which I share. I spent a week with my undergraduate class in Robots and Society talking about this particular topic, and these are the kinds of things. I mean, it's not just a question for sex deviants. Do you become a deviant if you engage in sex with a robot? I mean, what does it really mean if you actually start getting involved with this hunk of metal and plastic and getting it on? That's an interesting question in itself. The points that I'm also interested in the context of the premise for this particular session, can it serve kind of like methadone for these sex offenders, pedophiles, and the like as well too? Will it help to sublimate their desires? We don't know. This is a research question, and it needs to be explored. And the cost, if we don't explore it, is intolerably high. Whether the recidivism rate is 10% or 50%, that's 10% or 50% too much. And the point is, if these people, which we choose to do as a society, are released back into society, there will be more victims. Let's just face that fact. And we need to find a way to cope with that. And this is potentially one. But we don't want to make the world worse either as a consequence of that. So there's a lot of issues, just as there are with weapon systems, associated with the sorts of things. So this whole notion of talking about this is just, in many cases, off the board. There was a love and sex with robots workshop at the computing entertainment meeting that Malaysia came and shut down that conference as well too. They call it ridiculous, but I think it was more than just ridiculous from their perspective. It's taboo. It is completely taboo to talk about these particular issues, and I thank you for this particular forum to start to raise these particular questions with this audience and with those that are not in the room as well. The point is, many are you familiar here, I'm sure, with the uncanny valley. That's probably nothing new to you. But we are starting, some people, and I'll show Ishiguro's work as well too, to come out of the valley of of zombies at the bottom of that particular chart. Interesting, I was thinking about that the other day. That's a two-dimensional chart. One deals with behaviors, and the other deals with the morphology or the shape or the appearance of the robot. The appearance we're getting pretty good at, although not tactile and not with temperature control and other things like that as well too. But behavior can still be a problem. At the bottom of that, it's kind of like zombie-like, and so necrophiles might be down in that particular level if we really want to talk about the breadth of abuse that occurs within humanity. This is Ishiguro's latest work. I'll have the pleasure of visiting his laboratory in September, which I have not done. These are not sex robots, but he does have extensive funding from Japan to continue this particular work, and he has a company as well to deal with these particular kinds of platforms. It's quite remarkable. In the interest of time, I will just move ahead and show you what the real state of the art is commercially, which is kind of not there. Let's take a look at that. That's Roxy over there, which actually supposedly has AI because it can chat with you and tell you the baseball scores and other things as foreplay. So that's the notion of that particular robot. The VR robot, as you see, has a VR head, and it has an arm which is doing what that arm, you think that arm is probably doing in that case. And other aspects as well too deal with papers, and others have considered how the prostitution industry will prosper through the use of robot dolls, and many robot lovers, and many say this is a good thing for women because it will free prostitutes and the like, and others are saying it's a bad thing because it will end the age-old profession. So I don't have a position on that. I'm just trying to tell you what's coming down the pike. Now, this was a good article that was written by The Atlantic a while back. There was a company in Japan, I think it's Tetra, something like that, and I've actually been in contact with the guy. I asked him if I could use some pictures for this talk, and I decided against it because for the very reason I might end up being accused of child pornography, of having pictures of robot child dolls on that. But his motivation, purportedly, and in the email message, is that he wants to help pedophiles. He wants to both reduce the urges, and he wants to help the victims as well too. So this company can lead to a variety of different things. One, if you look at the right side of there, one of those robots was delivered to Canada. The guy was arrested. He was and is waiting trial. So what is it a crime? I mean, this is not just a computer graphic image. It's not necessarily based on any real child, but what do we do with this? And so if you talk about methadone, again, that's prescription-oriented. Maybe there are certain people that would warrant this particular case, and it would, in my estimation, warrant strong regulation and control and not just be available for the general public. That, to me, would be the wrong answer. But even more so, there is the, Kathleen Richardson has started the campaign against sex robots. You may have heard about the campaign against killer robots. Well, this is kind of modeled after that, not quite as big. But they had a production on, a statement on the production of child sex dolls, and they said basically Japan should shut down this particular guy. And we shouldn't do it. It's a preemptive ban. That's what the killer robots as well too. We don't want these kinds of robots. And so if you believe that, there's an organization which you can sign up and join. My bigger concerns are how it affects our relationships with each other. Having these devices potentially, and you've seen shows like, maybe some of you saw the TV shows, I don't even know if it's been renewed, Humans, which had a robot which had an adult mode, which the husband found and turned on and caused kind of trouble in the relationship over time. But Ex Machina, of course, and Blade Runner and many. I mean, we see this all the time in Hollywood, but we can't talk about it in the real world, which is really strange in some ways. So there's these notions of how the future is going to be affected by these sorts of things. One scientific study came out of Stanford just recently, and it talks about people becoming aroused if they touch a robot's private parts. And this is a generic now robot. I got two in those labs, and I used to pick it up at any place which I could get a hold of, but now I'm a little concerned if I do. But these are the kinds of platforms that can be used, and it showed that people, if you're told it's a private part, such as, what does it say, please touch my buttock in this particular case, people might feel uncomfortable, and they reported this. But they reported this in one of the most obscure conferences I ever heard of. And that's probably because it's not ready to be submitted. And I could not find an attribution of a funding source either, so I'm not sure it was necessarily funded. I could be wrong on both of those counts ultimately. And again, working with Sony, we started to learn the differences of the cultural variations of where it's appropriate to touch people and of different types of friends and others from, say, the East versus the West. And so if you're a Japanese individual, you would mind being touched in certain places that Westerners might not, and vice versa. These are the sorts of things that a robot designer would think about in these kinds of things. So the goal I have basically is to establish a research agenda. The two questions that I mention over here is, the red ones are the ones that really deal with the question here. Can we increase or decrease the violent behavior? We don't want to increase it, but will it increase or decrease the violent behavior by the user of the technology? And can it be used for therapeutic purposes for different types of potential sociopathic conditions? So the real issue from my point of view is that we need to understand this because of the human-human relationships that could potentially be affected by it. And I would contend that we have an ethical and, yes, even moral obligation, according to our ethical codes here, to investigate this. And if we don't do so, we do so at our own peril. So I will stop with that. And if you're interested in some other information as well, too, you can find it at that source. Thank you very much.
Ron, let me just ask one quick question before we go over to Christina. When we were looking at your slides and sort of talking this over yesterday, one of the things that you were suggesting is that as intimate robots become more common, that's likely to be a relationship that we have to deal with societally. People who end up deciding that they have robots primarily as their sex partners, that may become an identity. There's a good chance that that identity will end up being stigmatized. This question of normalization also raises this question of if people are regularly relieving urges with child robots, is that also a normalization of behavior? And is that a danger that by normalizing that behavior, regularizing that behavior, that this becomes less of a taboo, and in some sense this actually may become more dangerous in terms of pedophilia acceptance?
Yeah. The real point here is we just have research hypotheses right now. We don't have answers to those particular questions, and they definitely need to be investigated. The point that you mentioned earlier is the fact that we have a relatively small number of people, and if you've ever seen, there's a movie called Guys and Dolls. It's not the movie Guys and Dolls, but there's another movie, Guys and Dolls, which talks about people kind of like Lars and the real girl who actually are in some form deep attachments to these particular platforms. I expect as we get more sophisticated platforms, the sector will rapidly and significantly expand as well too. How that profoundly affects society is an unknown question, but we don't want to wait and be reactive to it. We want to be proactive, and that's what I'm trying to encourage here, is proactive research into this space, because hopefully, as you've seen in some of those videos there, it's happening. There's a lot of money to be made if you get that even close to right in the near term, as it happened with digital video devices and the internet, which are major purveyors of pornography. These kinds of things will find a home and a market and will be sold. And right now it's happening in places like that and not under appropriate guidance and ethical review. We need to consider this significantly so we don't make the kinds of mistakes that you're talking about.
Right. Ron, thanks so much. Christina, can I get you to contribute on maybe the visual imagery side of this discussion as well?
Hi, my name is Christina Couch, and I am a freelance science writer. So specifically, what interests me is technology, psychology, and kind of the intersections between those two things. So I'm really interested in things like how our feelings and thoughts and desires shape how technologies are designed, and in turn, the impact that those technologies have on our psychology and neurology and the way that we interact with each other. So what got me interested in the topic of this particular panel was about a year ago, I was working on an article about therapeutic uses of virtual reality. So I was interviewing researchers who are using virtual reality to treat things like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, phobias, addictions, all sorts of things. And I stumbled across a guy named Patrice Renaud, who is a researcher at a maximum security psychiatric facility in Montreal. And Dr. Renaud is actually using virtual reality to study pedophiles, specifically pedophiles right at the point of arousal. Which historically has been an incredibly difficult thing to do, because in order to have a study subject be right at that point, you need some sort of stimuli to get them there. And typically that's images or audio files, which come with these very, very valid moral and legal issues attached to them. Super valid. So Dr. Renaud actually started researching sex offenders in 1994. And at that point, he was using predominantly audio files to kind of do this research. And he wasn't really getting very good results. He was having a hard time getting enough data. When he was conducting his original experiments, his team actually published a paper which showed that even when they absolutely knew that a study subject was a known pedophile, they could not evoke a physiological response in about 40% of cases using just audio files. So fast forward a few years, when virtual reality becomes a little bit more accessible, Dr. Renaud started building virtual environments that came with fewer legal and moral issues attached. And he actually found that he was able to get a lot more data. And not only was he able to get a lot more data, but he was also able to actually find a difference in the physiological response when a pedophile is aroused versus a non-pedophile. And those differences are mainly in motor and eye movement. So when I heard this, I was really sort of blown away, because with all of the media that we have on sex offenders and recidivism rates, et cetera, I was really surprised that it is incredibly difficult to study this particular group of people. And at the same time, I was also really surprised that of all the tools we have for studying criminology, virtual reality was kind of a key piece of technology that opened up this particular study. So at the same time that we sort of had these new research tools, or at least potential new research tools coming out, we're also in the middle of somewhat of a shift in terms of how we think about child sex offenders. And at least a small part of that is due to groups like Virtuous Pedophiles. They are a support group specifically for pedophiles, run by pedophiles, and they're designed to prevent people from acting out. So it's a group that if people are feeling those types of inclinations, they can go to this group and try and find tools and resources to prevent acting on their impulses. And they're not actually the only group of their kind. A project of sort of a similar flavor that's been going on for a longer period of time is in Germany. It's called the Dunkelfeld Project, and that is a voluntary confidential treatment for people who are pedophiles, specifically designed to prevent them from acting out. So kind of at the same time that we have this potential for new research tools, and we also have accessibility to a population that historically has been much more difficult to access, typically when those two things come together, you see a lot of research coming out right at that intersection. But for this particular topic, there are still really significant barriers to doing that research. And I'm kind of hoping that our fellow panelists who are actually on the ground floor of doing research can talk about what some of those barriers are.
Christina, thank you so much for that. Can you talk just a little bit about why this program's been able to get off the ground in Germany? This therapeutic program in Germany that's allowing people to come forth and actually seek treatment. What are the barriers against that in the United States at this point?
Well, I mean, we still have, like Kate mentioned, the reporting issues. One of the things with the Dunkelfeld project is that there aren't reporting issues, so people can come in and be completely anonymous. From what I understand, they just get a digital number So you're actually just, there's no names involved whatsoever. So the reporting issues are a lot different. And also, they have a lot more support. At some point, there was a push by some group of people, all the qualifiers in the world here,
right.
to actually get this thing covered under health insurance, which is mind-blowing to me. I think you would have a really tough time with that in the United States.
It's interesting. In the U.S., something that is becoming more common is the option of chemical castration as a response to pedophilic urges. And there are cases, at least in Massachusetts, where Lupron, which is the drug that people end up using for this, has been covered under prescription insurance. What's interesting to me in some ways is the idea that this is a treatable condition, and that what we're seeing are essentially these sort of voluntary groups trying to help people who self-identify as pedophiles not act on urges. And to pick up Professor Arkin's notion that is there a possibility that this is the methadone to heroin, that having, whether it's virtual reality imagery, whether it's intimate robots, there's some way of sort of preventing this. It seems like the big shift that we would have to have first is an understanding of paraphilias as a medical problem, a psychological problem, rather than a moral failing. Kate, can you talk a little bit about how the legal system makes that change? So, there was a moment in time where homosexuality was moral failing and crime, and then became disease, and then over time has become normalized. How does law deal with changes from something being ethically unacceptable to being medicalized?
Well, I mean, the law in the case of homosexuality was really kind of following popular culture and not the other way around. So there was a massive shift in popular culture, probably started with, TV shows having a lot of gay and lesbian people who were open, and that kind of seeping into the public consciousness and becoming an okay thing, and then the law kind of came afterwards. In this case, so I just saw the documentary Untouchable that premiered at Tribeca, which is about this issue and how the legal system deals with it. And it was shocking to see how, I think they were looking at the case of Florida, but if you throw the word pedophilia into any type of policy or legal debate, all the politicians are immediately like, this is a law that's going to crack down on pedophilia. I have to vote for it. And there's no way that they can have any sort of conversation about any of these things, because it's such a, the topic just understandably raises so many emotions in people that there's no rational conversation to be had. And I was shocked when I was doing some online reading for this panel at how people who, had written New York Times op-eds about, perhaps new methods of treating this, they were getting, like, there are YouTube videos about them where people are saying that, they should be slaughtered and whatnot, just for suggesting that this could possibly be an illness rather than a moral failing. So it's very hard, and I think the social conversation has to happen before the legal conversation.
Do you think there's something in German society, which you know at least something about, that is different in sort of understanding, and just to be clear in my previous question, I was not in any way trying to suggest the medicalization of homosexuality as a problem, nor was I trying to suggest the normalization of pedophilia. What I was trying to suggest was there are shifts where we bring something out of a morally unacceptable territory and then deal with it as a different issue, for instance, dealing with it as a medical issue. It sounds like Germany around pedophilia has figured out how to make a shift into dealing with this as a medical and psychological condition. And as you just pointed out in the US, we're willing to pass laws that literally make it impossible for people convicted of child sex crimes to live within a state. They're actually constraining physical space in which ex-offenders can live so narrowly that there are huge swaths of, for instance, the state of Florida where people can't legally live. How does that shift take place?
Well, I feel like continental Europe generally has a very different attitude towards anything sexual, really. They're less Puritan than the American society. And I mean, the Germans in particular have always been very practical about this sort of thing. And for example, I believe you had some of the German government visiting your lab one day, and they were from the Green Party, and they wanted to instate, I think, a flat tax on downloading files from the internet and just get rid of copyright law and just tax people on what they download. And I was like, well, how does pornography fit into that? And they didn't bat an eyelid. They were like, of course that, and they explained how it would work, and they were like, yes, that's like any other file. I just couldn't imagine having that conversation with politicians in the United States. So I just feel like European culture is a little bit more less up in arms and screamy about this topic generally.
Ron, you were ending your remarks with basically the outlines of a research agenda. You are a roboticist, you are a robot ethicist. What's stopping you?
Funding. That's the primary question. Actually, the first time I raised the topic of pedophiles being treated as methadone was maybe 10 years ago. I can't remember the meeting I was at, but of course there were people, the press was present there as well too, and that got articles, of course, because that's what the press does. And hopefully we won't be quite as sensationalistic as an aftermath of this entire meeting as well. But I did get an email from a social worker who had offered to me 20 or 30, I can't remember the number, human subjects, sex offenders that they were working with. And they said, here are some people that we can provide for these studies. And I just had to wistfully smile and say, okay, where am I going to get those resources from? Do I want the equivalent of the Golden Fleece Award in the National Science Foundation or NIH to, if they did fund me, to have the senators come out and parade this research as robots for sex? That's the end of that discussion as well. The only hope, I would contend, are foundations. Foundations are one possibility. And there was a well-known foundation, which I will not name here as well too, who I had a champion at, who discussed a proposal I had. And this wasn't even a concrete proposal to do the research. This was just trying to deal with ethical guidelines and the like as well. And they evidently had, based on what my champion told me, had discussions of this and others over a period of 2 days, and nothing came from that as well too. So if it's not from foundations, I honestly don't know where the funding is going to come from.
Christina, you've had the opportunity to talk to people who are doing therapy in this space, who are really making these sort of interventions to try to figure out whether paraphilias are treatable, whether people can get help with their urges. What are people's motivations for doing this work? Clearly this is work that's incredibly difficult. There's huge barriers associated with it. There's enormous social stigma associated with it. Do you have a sense for who the people who are doing this work are, and to what extent they're able to communicate this work and perhaps start working on norm shift on whether there are ways that we can deal with these issues as a disease rather than moral failing?
I don't know that the landscape of the research coming out is big enough to draw any type of generalizations. I mean, as far as I know, I only know of 2 researchers that are using virtual reality in anything dealing with this. And maybe that landscape is bigger than my scope of knowledge, but it is small to begin with. And so it's tough to draw any sort of generalizations about who the people are who are researching or what challenges they're facing, because the field is tiny. So I don't know how to answer that, unfortunately.
Yeah. In talking with the 2 that you've worked on, is there a backstory to how they got involved with this work?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what Dr. Renaud's backstory is. I know that he had been studying sex offenders for years prior to using virtual reality. I really think that for him, at least, the problem of not being able to get usable data was forcing him to look for any other means of finding it. So I'm not sure.
So I want to open the mics, and so if anyone feels like asking a question, please come on up. Kate, I just want to put one more question to you, because I know that in many ways you find yourself sort of taking on these issues as they're immediately sort of emerging in the space. Dr. Arkin put a number of possible issues on the table that happen around intimate robotics. What do you see as the key research questions? They're not necessarily around pedophilia or paraphilias. As an active researcher in this space, what do you find yourself sort of looking at around the questions of intimate robotics and these sort of collisions, as you've described it? What do you predict needing research in that space?
I mean, my main research interest is how do our interactions with robots affect our interactions with humans? And, you know, I'm very much a fan of the harm principle, where if our interactions with robots end up leading to harmful interactions with other humans, then that's a bad thing. But we also have no idea whether any of our interactions with robots are going to lead to any of the consequences that people are concerned about. So I think that's incredibly important to study in intimate robotics in particular. And what was the other part of your question?
No, it was really that question of, as an experimentalist as this field, as someone who's sort of looking at designing research in this space, are there things that you're thinking about studying around this? Are you things that you know that people are actively studying around intimate robotics that are going to help us answer some of those questions, whether it is questions about harm or whether it's questions about how human relationships are transformed? I don't know if you want to talk about any of your robot harm research within this, but...
I mean, our robot harm research was looking at violent behavior towards robots, and basically we've only gotten to the point where, again, we can observe the behavior, we can measure the behavior, but we don't know whether interacting with robots changes your behavior towards people. And I think that's really the key question. It's a very difficult question to research, and particularly in the area of intimate robotics with no funding and the social stigma, I'm worried that it won't be addressed at all. And I would be interested in doing it, but again, like Ron said, I mean, he's a big name in social robotics. He can't get the funding to do it. How are any of us going to?
So we're going to go to a question first to the mic in the middle. Let me just say something that I probably should have said earlier in this conference. It's something that I like to say at academic conferences. Academics in many cases have forgotten what a question is. A question is not a statement. It is also not a speech. It is an interrogative. You can tell that it's a question because usually someone's voice rises at the end of it. And if you have a test of whether this is a question or not, let me first say that this is what I think, what do you think of what I think, is not a question. A question is something that someone on this panel in theory could give a novel answer to. So with that in mind, if you would introduce yourself and put forward a question, that would be great.
Well, that was a bit daunting. I'm Sheila Heyman.
Not you specifically.
And in the past 3 weeks, I've had to get used to apologising for being British. I would just like to say in this context that I shall be campaigning for return to absolute monarchy on the basis that the Queen is the only person with the track record, the authority and the public trust to actually repair the damage that's been done. Thank you. So in defence of continental Europe and its culture, I have a bit of experience of the Quakers' work in this field. As you know, the Quakers were some of the first people to start visiting people in prison, and they've also been working with sex offenders, because one of the things that worries me, and this will become a question, don't worry, about the direction of this conversation, is that all these technologies seem to me to be further sequestering and isolating the sex offenders from human society. And that surely, as you said at the beginning, is something that they're trying very hard, to get over. They want to be integrated with our society. They want to be part of it. And so my question is, do you think that that it is possible in this country to propose, I think you sort of started to answer it, a system like that whereby there are groups of people who actually voluntarily engage with paedophiles and sex offenders on the basis that, they are humans too, and that we shouldn't treat them even worse necessarily than we treat violent criminals?
Terrific, thank you. Christina, do you want to try that one?
Sure. I mean, I know that there are certain places in the country that are sort of beginning to rethink things like sex offender registry and housing. A story just came out yesterday about Connecticut, I think, has a task force specifically devoted to that. So, I mean, there are some options there, and unfortunately, like, I'm in no way prepared to give any sort of prescriptive answer or say, you know, this is right or this is wrong. But at least some people are beginning to look into it, and I think that even that is like somewhat of a step for figuring out the best way to deal with this segment of the population.
Ron?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
As I mentioned, I'm primarily concerned with the victims as opposed to the offenders in this particular case. But if you take the methadone example as well, too, if we could use it as a management tool where other human adjunct therapies could be put in place to do exactly what you say, that might be appropriate. I don't believe that this is a cure-all or a panacea for reintegrating sex offenders into society. That's a very complex problem, and it also deals with the stigma that you folks were referring to as well. But I do believe it can play a positive, it's a hypothesis again. I believe the hypothesis that it can play a positive role needs to be understood, and at least in the management of the, if it is a disease.
And sorry, I just want to jump right back in. As far as integration, whether that's a good idea, the best methods of doing that, et cetera, we really can't talk about that until we know more about this segment. So that seems to me to be a question that is several steps away. The data is scarce, so that's an important thing.
And I'm also concerned because the people who are being visited have already been convicted of a sex crime, and that's actually a very small percentage of, you know, the entire population of potential sex offenders or people who have these urges. And right now, we do have the problem that these people have a lot of trouble coming forward and even confiding in anyone at all, because all confidentiality is waived in their case because of the reporting requirements. So while I love the idea that, you know, groups are forming to help these people, it's not enough. We need legal changes, and I think if we can help with technology as well, that's not a bad thing.
I'm going to go to Willow for our next question.
Hi, my name is Willow Brew. I'm an affiliate at the Center for Civic Media, among other things. One of my questions has to do with, you're talking a lot about a lack of data and a lack of research and other things, and this is also the most academic panel that we've had so far. And so I'm wondering if by opening up sex research to a more citizen science approach in the way that the previous panels have had, these outlier cases that you're speaking of where we're also lacking data, we might catch more that way. And are there any efforts to democratize sex research in the same way that these other fields have?
So, Ron, maybe to you?
Yeah. Well, I am an academic, so I'll take partial credit for that. I believe that this needs to be studied in whichever way and whatever way possible. Citizen science is fine as long as it is done in a scientific and a manner where we can get a deeper understanding of the problems. You could do crowdsourcing, I guess, as well, too, or other strategies to be able to try and engage a broader community. But it needs to be this does need strictly controlled scientific evaluation with IRB boards and all these other things as well, too, at least in my mind, to get reliable data. Well, as we said, we couldn't even get accurate recidivism rates, and how hard could that possibly be? From 10 to 45 to 50%, the numbers were all over the place. And that's extremely frustrating because of the dearth of data that you were referring to. So I applaud anyone who is trying to move forward in any venue possible, in any country possible, an understanding of this particular issue proactively, and not just for the pedophiles as well, too. Like I said, I'm concerned also for broader segments of our society and other societies that will be affected by the technology that is coming down the pike. We need to understand that. That might be easier to do than the sexual deviant, as so-called research, which some may view all of this as sexual deviance if you're engaging with machines, for example.
It's worth mentioning that virtual reality is also being used to study and treat people who are victims of sexual trauma as well. So this is not a one-way street. I know that the University of California, for example, is putting together, they are trying to build I'm gonna butcher this. They're trying to build a virtual reality simulation to treat PTSD suffered by victims of sexual assault. And so when we talk about amplifying research methods, it's not just for offenders. Those types of applications can also, in some cases, be used to actually help victims as well.
So I want to make sure that everyone who's standing up gets a chance to ask a question. And so due to time constraints, what I'm going to do is just take the next 3 questions. We're going to do our best to answer them to the best that we can. So we'll go middle side of the room, and then we'll end with Victoria.
Hi. Hello? Yeah. So you all seem to agree that a lack of funding and too much stigma prevents good science on this. I guess my question is, let's say there was no stigma and there was a surplus of funding. What would the science look like? So you suggested, strictly scientific, controlled experiments, but this doesn't seem to get at the sorts of questions that Ethan sort of alluded to at the very beginning of how the culture changes in the medium and very long term, and the maybe acceptance or lack of acceptance, and how these things normalize, and how it changes the future of sort of these sorts of paraphilias. Great. So the question there is both, what would a concrete research agenda look like, and how would we make a move around this normative question of treating paraphilias as disease rather than as moral failing? Let's go over here.
So I think there's some research that indicates that pornography has changed expectations of sex. And so if and when these child sex robots are rolled out, and you say it's happening sooner than we think it is, who gets to decide whether you can have a child sex robot as therapy, and who gets to decide whether you have it as entertainment? And so how will this be regulated?
Right. Terrific. So questions about the long-term effects of pornography on sexuality, and if this is a therapeutic technology, what's the line between therapeutic and entertainment technologies? Victoria.
Hi, so I'm Victoria Modesta. I'm one of the Director's Fellows here. I'm very, very interested in the whole concept of sexual identity, especially in areas where it's kind of considered slightly inappropriate, like, for example, with disability and sexuality. It's just something you don't really think about. But I'm very neutral on this, but just looking at the idea of sexual deviance and how much correlation or research has been done to determine whether something like pedophilia is extremely different from all the other different sexual deviances we have in society, BDSM, and obviously up until recently, even being attracted to the opposite sex or bestiality, or, all of those range of things, that are considered unnatural. How much link has there been made between those? And just lastly, if we are looking at potentially changing unwanted behavior that humans are kind of expressing, is it possible to cross-examine something like violence and the effects of virtual reality or games that have the effect on people with extreme violence? Is it possibly connected to just look at, is it really possible to cure someone? Is it a disease, or is it just a very unfortunate natural deviance that unfortunately doesn't fit with the modern society?
So some rather deep questions there about what the very nature of paraphilias are, whether there's a continuum from more socially acceptable behavior like BDSM into more violent sexuality. Questions about, in a world where we had the money and the ability to have a research agenda around this, what is it that we would actually work on? How would we work on this question of disease versus moral failing, if in fact this turns out to be a disease rather than just a trait? A very provocative question about what we believe pornography does to desire, and whether robots that might be usable for therapeutic purposes. Kate, can I ask you maybe to take on the pornography question first?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the research on pornography is very difficult to evaluate, but the fact is that people have been doing research and have been trying to get at the question of how pornography, or violent video games for that matter, influence people's behavior. And I think that a lot of this is research that, while we need to be critical of it, we can also draw on for these purposes. So I'm answering all three questions at once, I guess. But you know, the methodologies that have been used in those cases, we can also apply to looking at robotics and VR, which are more physical. I do think that we can't completely just compare and learn from those findings in those areas, because what we're talking about is something that's much more physical, and we're very physical creatures, and so that might actually bring it to a new level and have different effects than something that's just on a screen like pornography or a video game. But that's definitely, drawing on that body of research is definitely the direction in which this would go as a research agenda.
Christina, can I get you to weigh in on any of those questions?
Sure. The question regarding using technology to treat this type of issue, I think that you had asked what the research is in terms of pedophilia versus bestiality or other forms of paraphilia, and I don't know, to be honest. I feel I'm not a sexuality researcher. I'm not equipped to comment on that specific thing, but as far as when we look at technology, one thing that has emerged in the 20 plus years that we've been looking to study virtual reality is that it can influence behavior. There's about 20 years worth of research on using virtual reality to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome, stress disorder. For a certain segment of people that have that, using virtual reality can actually reduce the symptoms of PTSD quicker than traditional therapies do. Virtual reality has also, there's at least one study that shows that virtual reality can be used to reduce unconscious racial bias. I did a big project last year on racial bias, and that is unconscious racial bias is an incredibly difficult thing to break, even temporarily. So as far as, the research seems to be there in terms of, can something like virtual reality be used to change behavior, or at least to influence how we think about behavior? So I don't think it's tremendously crazy to think that under certain contexts that maybe you could use this type of technology to actually change behavior within pedophiles. It's certainly a thing that is worth looking into.
Ron, I wonder if I can get you specifically, because you made this assertion, which I think is very interesting, that this is coming, whether we like it or not, to wrestle with this question of robots for therapy, robots for pleasure. If we do start exploring the possibility of what we might call the methadone theory, do we end up normalizing sexuality with child robots? Where does that push us? Where does that take us?
Okay. Well, let me first answer the two of the questions. I apologize to the third questioner because I'm not sure I'm capable of talking about the fundamental differences with pedophilia and others. Regarding scientific methodologies, the human research interaction community has almost become obsessed with data gathering and data collection to the point where some people think they're gone a little too far in not accepting publications that do not have extremely detailed, valid scientific methods to be able to look at and tease out small pieces of interactions which eventually go to both short-term studies and long-term studies, longitudinal studies as they're referred to. So I'm confident methodologies could be done, which would not happen all at once. There's a series of progression of scientific experiments by a larger community which would need to be undertaken to get that kind of data. In regard to the second question, who would get those systems? To my mind, it should be physicians and or courts that would say that this individual is a threat to society or has been shown to be a threat to society. And as such, this is an appropriate treatment for that particular individual, whether to bring them back or to protect society as a whole. My concern, though, is very much related to that. I don't like hearing about these being used for entertainment. And I am the one side effect of moving forward with the design of these robots is a potential black market which could be created for their use by individuals. That worries me significantly, and thus they would have to be a quasi-controlled substance in a sense to be able to do this accurately, but even then it doesn't always work. The issue of normalization, as you brought up, how does that change society as a whole and the acceptance to certain kinds of behavior? As you mentioned, that happens routinely in almost every, even non-technological aspects, as we've seen. We've seen a change with respect to the definitions of marriage. You notice I put up there robot marriage as a possibility as well, too. Are you allowed eventually to marry an artifact? The question of bestiality was brought up as well, too. Is this criminalized because it's bestiality? I have spent my entire career studying animal behavior, including humans in a variety of different circumstances. And the notion of studying sexual deviance and actual normal humans interacting with these things can provide the basis for a deeper understanding of how that operates, and then working in conjunction in a truly interdisciplinary effort with sociologists and anthropologists and the like as well too. To get a deeper understanding of the potential societal effects is the only effective way to be able to come to answers to that.
So thank you so much. I really want to give an extra special thanks to my panelists. This is not an easy panel for anyone to come up and have this conversation for an hour or so. Really appreciate the quality of the questions, the quality of the attention from the crowd, and particularly the contributions from the folks here on stage. So thank you so much. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, absolutely. Thanks. Let me just check very quickly. Great, I'm still employed by MIT. Okay, just needed to check in on that very, very quickly. So this is the moment in the program where we have a seamless transition from one tricky topic to another tricky topic. In this particular case, we're transitioning from the idea of research that in many cases makes us deeply uncomfortable, research that in many cases we haven't been able to take on for a complicated wealth of ethical reasons, social reasons, as well as legal reasons. We now have a panel which is looking primarily at legal barriers to research. And this is a panel that really asks the question, why can't we do that? Why aren't we allowed to take on certain particularly pressing research questions? To moderate this panel, we have someone who, over the last 5 years, I have heard dozens of times, why can't we do that? Because he is my doctoral student, Nathan Matthias, who is doing absolutely groundbreaking work around questions of discrimination, harassment, and online behaviors that are dangerous and detrimental to communities, and helping communities try to figure out how to find their way through it. So I'm very, very happy to hand you over to Nathan Matthias, who's going to lead us through this next set of the conversation. He, in turn, is looking for something that can advance slides, and I will hand it to him and hand the stage to him at the same time.
Thank you very much, Ethan. As Ethan said, quite often when we're asking these difficult questions, we're asking about questions where we might not even know how to ask where the line is. But in other cases, when researchers work to advance public knowledge, even on uncontroversial topics, we can still find ourselves forbidden from doing the research or disseminating the research, especially at moments when the research we're doing or the work of spreading it comes into tension with the businesses who are involved in the issues we study and in the very work of sharing knowledge. At such moments, we can find ourselves tied to the mast, not as Cory Doctorow said earlier today, of our principles, but tied to the mast of laws that have been set up to protect those interests and which can get in the way of important work in public knowledge. Here today, we're going to be hearing from speakers who have done work that touches up against laws related to cybercrime and laws related to copyright. In the areas of cybercrime, we have laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which, while it was designed to help people and companies be protected against certain kinds of unlawful access to computers has also turned out to be a powerful protection against accountability as researchers try to understand the power of AI and the impact that machine learning can have, not just on our everyday lives, but also on fundamental principles and values of equality, fairness, and discrimination. And even when we've produced that knowledge, when we've completed our research, when we've published it, we can discover that not everyone is able to access that research. That when we do work in the public interest, when we add to knowledge, often the people who are most able to access it are the people with the most resources, the people and the institutions who are able to pay. At those moments, we basically have three choices. Our first option is to just give up and walk away from the challenge of advancing public knowledge. Our second option, which is what many of us do, is to disobey quietly, to disregard the rules and hope that we won't get caught in lots of small and everyday ways. And it takes great courage to see the third option, which is to try to solve the issue, not just for ourselves, but for whole fields and societies. And I'm excited today that we're going to be hearing from two researchers who have done remarkable work to do just that. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Dr. Carrie Karahalios, a professor of computer science at the University of Illinois. Carrie has been a pioneering researcher of ways that social technology is shaping our lives as societies, designing systems and helping expand our theories to understand our relationship to each other and how that's mediated through social networks, through communication technologies. She's also an expert on algorithmic accountability and a leader in early stage efforts across academia to understand the role that machine learning systems are playing in our everyday social lives. Just 3 weeks ago, she joined together with researchers at the University of Michigan, Northeastern University, First Look Media, and the American Civil Liberties Union to file a lawsuit aimed at clarifying whether researchers should or could be able to do important research to understand algorithmic accountability and discrimination. After Carrie, we're going to be hearing from Alexandra, who is a Kazakhstani researcher who's studied everything from neuroscience to computer science to history of science, and is most well known for her work on a system called Sci-Hub, which provides over 51 million scholarly articles online for free by pooling the access credentials of academics from many universities and making those articles available freely to download. As we think about the work that Carrie has been doing to better study the impact of social technologies and algorithms on our lives and the legal boundaries that forbid that work, and as we think about the legal challenges that make it difficult for everyone to access precious knowledge coming out of research, we'll also be having a conversation about the challenges of making that step to try to solve a wider problem for a wider field and community, as well as those tensions we find ourselves in with business and with law at the boundaries of law and research. Carrie. Please welcome Carrie.
Oh, we have Alexandra.
We are having difficulties with Alexandra joining us. It now looks like those have been resolved. So actually, let me ask you to please welcome Alexandria Elbakian to share her work with us.
So should I start?
That would be lovely. Thank you, Alexandra.
Okay, because I saw that you asked starting before. Okay, so can I see the slides? Hello?
We're working on it.
So we're very grateful for Alexandra, who's joining us remotely. And we're grateful for all of your patience as we make sure the video link works, as we get the slides together. We'll also have some translation in the Q&A section. And we appreciate your patience as we get these things together. Expect the slides, hopefully, to arrive in a moment. Alexandra, are you able to maybe tell us a little bit about the work you do and perhaps start telling us a little bit about Sci-Hub as our team tries to get those slides moving? Oh, we've got them. Excellent.
Okay. Okay, so Sci-Hub. And let me start with the problem. So the problem of dissemination of research results. Today it's very limited because prices to read research papers are very high. And next slide, please. Yeah. Can I see next slide? Okay. So these prices render the research papers to be inaccessible by individual readers and even those people who normally should have access to research papers, such as scientists, students, and medical doctors, they also don't have access. So I created Sci-Hub, a website where you can get these papers for no payment. But there is only problem. So the websites like Sci-Hub, they are currently prohibited by government, and that means operation of such websites is currently not lawful. Because research papers are considered to be some kind of private property, and hence the free dissemination of them is, can be considered some kind of theft. And okay, next slide. So let me tell something about the prehistory of the website. Yes, I myself experienced a problem while working on my research projects in Kazakhstan, and I searched it online, and I found many places where people help each other to get literature and circumvent the paywalls, and such places both in English and Russian, many. And for example, you can see on the slide such forum in Russian. And next slide. Okay, so in 2009, I became a member of neuroscience.ru online forum. And this forum had a separate topic where everyone asked about how to get such and such paper, and other people who had access, they helped. So I got an idea to make this more automatic and more convenient. For example, you could automatically send uploaded paper to email. So I asked forum administrator to join the team of developers, but he was not very fond of the idea, and particularly because of copyright law. Next slide. And in 2011, I became a member of another research forum, and they have implemented what I was thinking about 2 years ago. So they had research papers automatically uploaded to the forum and sent to emails. So there was some kind of very elaborate rules developed, and also there was a system implemented in Perl. But main developer abandoned the system. So when I found it, it was basically barely working. And okay, next slide. Okay, so this is another project of that kind. It's called Super Mega Skачивалка or Super Mega Downloader. In English, it was created by students of one big Russian university. And here you could put in a DOI, and it would be downloaded using university access and give out PDF directly. And here developers say that it was successful for 41% of requested papers. So it was a half-closed and non-public project, and to access it, you needed to complete a Russian proverb. So yeah, only people from Russian roots could access it. And okay. Next slide. So in 2011, I created SecHub. The first alpha version was drafted in a couple of days. And what I did is I took open source software that was created to circumvent ordinary website blogs, and I modified it to work with universities. So if not this open source, I would not be able to implement the idea quickly. And what SecHub did is allowed users to browse research websites as if they were browsing from university computer. And hence they could download by university subscription. And at first, SecHub didn't rely on any cross-ref DOI. And after a few months later, I was contacted by Library Genesis admin, and they just created a section on their website to store research papers. And SecHub started to upload some papers here, but not in very big amounts. And at first, SecHub was used primarily by former Soviet Union countries. I blocked it. And I even blocked access for United States and some Europe to keep the project safe. After 1 year of work, people in China and Iran became aware of the project. And then traffic became so high that our university accesses, they started being blocked. So I had to block China and Iran from the website too. Yes, but now all these countries are unblocked and working. And next slide. Okay, so in 2014, I started to proactively download papers from research websites and upload them to Library Genesis and collection and to SecHub open storage. So by that time, project got its own storage. Well, once paper is downloaded once, it's basically free and you don't need to download it again. So for major publishers now, we have more than 90% of papers freed, and so technically the problem of paywall is solved. What is left is to make all this legal. And next slide. Okay, so why science has to be open? There are many reasons, but what is most important, I think, is that the nature of science is about discovering secrets and not about keeping them. Okay, next slide. And when science is open, how can it benefit research? Let's see, today's system makes science to be concentrated in big organizations, so that small companies and individuals simply they cannot offer subscriptions, and that means they cannot make their creative contributions. The research is concentrated in big institutions, and these institutions tend to comply to standards. And hence science became standardized, and new ideas cannot develop. So when science is open, perhaps there will be a big progress forward. Okay, done.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next, we'll hear from Carrie. Then we'll have a conversation before opening it up to the floor. Please welcome Carrie Karahelios.
I'm just going to wait for some slides. Sorry.
You don't want to use Alexandra's?
I would love to use her graph, actually. So I'm going to talk about the need for auditing algorithms. And a lot of this work started for me around 2011, 2012, along with colleagues Christian Sandvik, Kevin Hamilton, and Cedric Langbort, when we founded the Center for People and Infrastructures. And we decided we really, really wanted to investigate the algorithms that shape people's lives in socio-technical systems. And one of our first projects was a case study looking at a surveillance system with cameras in Europe on a train station. And one of the things we encountered was the difficulties, like imagine a system with machine learning where an operator might always stop and pause the camera looking at a specific type of person, whether they be black or white. In this case, we were worried that they might always stop when somebody was black. What happens when a system learns this and takes bias and builds it into a machine learning algorithm from training data and keeps growing? In contrast, I mean, this is a case where people were really worried that people that were black would constantly be observed. In almost reality, we started seeing was infrastructures and systems where black people weren't seen at all. So I don't know if you remember this case. Desi and Wanda made a YouTube video where they're looking at a new HP camera that was created. And it turns out that this camera was supposed to track people, and it tracked Wanda perfectly. Wanda would go to the left, she would go to the right, she would zoom in and she would zoom out. The camera did a beautiful job. Desi, who happened to be black, would go in, move around, jump, move back and forth. Absolutely nothing would happen. He went so far as to claim facetiously that HP Hewlett cameras were racist. He said this in a very, very humorous tone, but they touched on a really big, important problem. Another case that happened here in Boston was with Street Bump. July 12th, this was an interesting system that was released. You had smartphones in cars and taxis, and with the accelerometers on these phones, you can tell where there were potholes. This was lauded as a huge, huge crowdsourcing success, and it was in many ways. In 2014, it was revealed, though, that some poor parts of Boston were not serviced by this, and potholes were only getting fixed in rich, wealthy suburbs, and not in some of the poorer neighborhoods. What was really great about this information coming out was that the problem was solved. They said they fixed it. I don't know how they fixed it, but they said they fixed it. Another case, much more recent, 2016, Amazon Prime same-day delivery. One of the most stark examples here, again, is in Boston. When you look here, Roxbury, pretty much all parts of Boston are getting same-day delivery from Amazon Prime. Roxbury is not. Same thing happened in a bunch of cities. When this information was revealed and made available to the public, and also made clear to Amazon that it was unacceptable, immediately this was remedied in Boston, New York City, and Chicago. Hopefully it will be remedied across the country. But this information needs to get out there for change to happen. Something else you've probably seen very recently around the same time in the newspaper is predictive policing. Again, this needs to be audited. We need to see if there's bias in who's being predictively observed, who's being maybe stalked by police, or what zones are being predictively observed. Are they poor areas? Are they wealthier areas? And probably even most recently, in terms of the game Pokemon Go, why is it that there are fewer Pokemon stops in poor neighborhoods and so many in rich, wealthy areas? There's lots of reasons for this, and again, crowdsourcing plays a role here. But we need to think about the bigger consequences. I mean, what happens when we have self-driving cars and the car has to make a decision about whether the owner of the car dies, the person on that corner, or the person on that corner? How do we make sure we look at these algorithms and objectively audit them so then we can then find solutions for them? So in that vein, we decided with our center to explore fair housing. Are racial minorities less likely to find housing via algorithmic matching systems? And there's been an interesting study done by Edelman where he found that if you are black and you are renting an apartment on Airbnb, you would get less money for your unit than somebody who was white that had a similar unit that was controlled for price and location. Does this work both ways? So it turns out that in looking at this work, there is a precedent for and full support for auditing for housing. Civil Rights Act of 1964 decreed that race simply could not be considered in some situations. The Fair Housing Act, 68, said that you could not discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Took 20 years later, unfortunately, to add disability and familial status. I say unfortunately because it took too long. And again, later in 1987, the Housing and Community Development Act declared that the Department of Housing and Urban, some word that I left out, can enforce the FHA. And specifically, on top of that, it can build special projects, including the development of prototypes to respond to new or sophisticated forms of discrimination against persons protected. So how did they do this? They did what's called a traditional audit today. So they would pair two people together, let's say one white person, one minority. They would match them on family and economic features. They would have them successively visit realtors, and then they would record the outcomes, what happened. The first one of these paired testing experiments happened in 1977. The most recent one happened in 2012. And one of the things that they found was that blacks, Hispanics, and Asians were told about fewer units than white people. Since then, we've had lots and lots of online systems that found housing for us. There's Zillow, there's Trulia, there's Homes.com. So many of them, I can't even begin to list them all in this 10-minute session. But we wanted to explore what happens on these online sites with these socio-technical systems that might have crowdsourcing implications as well. So we wrote this paper about auditing algorithms and methodologies for doing so. And we tried to apply this for fair housing. The first methodology we came up with was getting the code. But this can be really wicked hard. People don't want to give you their code. We've tried. That said, even if you were to get it, it would be really hard to make sense of it sometimes. But researchers were very willing to give us their code. This was a very famous paper in 1996 by David Forsyth and Margaret Fleck. They gladly gave us the code immediately. And they became famous writing an algorithm called Finding Naked People. And if you look at the code, there's actually lines of code in here that they told me they actually had to add a line of code because their Finding Naked People algorithm did not find black people. So they actually had to go in there and make it find more people. Some might argue that the act of doing this actually causes ethical concerns, and I'm not going to get into that here. But getting the code is hard, and making sense of the code is hard. Another option is to ask the users. And we've done this a lot with our own work. In housing, it's very hard to get a large group of people with a good sample to actually go and look for housing for you, and to do this in the scale nationally in the thousands, hundreds of thousands. We've done this in the field of algorithmic awareness, and I can tell you that we faced many, many challenges doing this. It took us over a year and a half to get a non-probability sample, which even that is not ideal. Another approach is to collect data manually. And that is also extremely difficult. In the case of housing, it may be even impossible to find this housing data online because people aren't going to provide it. We've tried having people crowdsource it using Mechanical Turk and similar systems. Not only is it not reliable, but people do not provide it. Latanya Sweeney, however, did an amazing study where she looked at searches for people online. And she did this manually, I want to add. So she would put in names of white people, and she would say, look, Carrie Swalwart found. You put in the name of somebody who happens to not be white, and it says Keisha Bentley arrested, as opposed to being found. She did this with 1,000 people manually by hand. And one of the things we're going to see a little bit later is how this might even be a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, doing this manually on some sites. You can scrape everything. Again, this is a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, but we're all doing this. Many researchers are doing this today. I mean, people are scraping left and right. And it's something that you see in hackathons every day. It's something that you see in computer science classes. It's something you see in data mining. And it's something predominant in conferences like KDD, dub, CIKM, and so forth. When our study with bias in social media feeds came to an end in April of 2015 because the API was deprecated. So we had the option to scrape there. We chose not to because we wanted to maintain a good relationship with Facebook. We decided that the project could come to a reasonable end and we can work on other things. But we could have continued the exact same work if we'd scraped the site. The interface would look almost identical. We had lots of people in computer science departments using our tool, lots of people using our tool in art and design departments internationally. But we shut it down, and we intentionally shut it down because of the terms of service. And last but not least, actually it's the second to last but not least, sock puppets. Sock puppets, as you might imagine, is an approach where you create fake identities and you put them into a system and see what outcomes you get from these multiple sock puppets. So you might make an account for somebody and say this person is a female who's 46, white, makes this much income. Make another account and say this person is black, 45, makes this much income. And then let these little bots loose on the internet and see what happens and measure the differences that you get in terms of advertisements, in terms of housing, and so forth. This approach can work really, really, really well. Christo Wilson has used this, and his colleagues have used this very, very well-defined price discrimination. So they found, for example, that if you buy things on your mobile phone, it costs more than if you buy it using a desktop. He's found that there's price steering happening from the cookies that you leave on your computer. Sometimes the more times you go to a site, it might be more expensive than just clearing everything and starting from scratch. What they did is they made 300 sock puppets, but it wasn't enough to get the work done. They used 300 real people and made additional thousands of sock puppets to actually find statistical meaningful data. And finally, you could do a collective audit. And this is hard, and this would be a dream, but I pose this as something that we should all strive for in the future, where you get lots of people working together to provide common information to be able to do this type of audit that we talk about. So we got really, really excited when this paper was cited by a White House report on big data. They named 5 national priorities that were essential for the development of big data technologies. And one of them was algorithm auditing. Among some of the others included the right to appeal an algorithmic decision, ethical counsels, and clear transparency in how you create algorithms. Despite that, very specifically what they said about audits is that they want to promote academic research and industry development of algorithmic auditing and external testing of big data systems to ensure that people are being treated fairly. And we got super excited and we're like, this is great, let's get to work. And there was one block, and that's the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This was founded in 1986. Some say it was a response to the movie War Games, which came out just a few years before. And at the time, it was a very different environment than the environment we're living in today. Keep in mind that we didn't have web browsers at the time. Most people did not have broadband or even access to email. And so as a response to this, to continue our work and to continue it without ambiguity in the law and to continue it with informality, with the ACLU and colleagues, we sued the US government. This happened, like Nathan said, just a few weeks ago. And we're waiting now to get a response from the government to see what happens. Specifically, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act says that it prohibits unauthorized access to a protected computer. And a protected computer implies any government computer, any interstate or international foreign commerce or communication system. It also includes any website accessible on the internet. Even the term protected computer can be ambiguous for many. The thing that is most confusing is the term that you exceed authorized access. And this is specifically the point that we're targeting in the lawsuit. In this case, many courts to date have repeatedly asserted that terms of service, violating terms of service exceeds authorized access. So the first violation of this is a 1-year maximum prison sentence and a fine. Subsequent violations result in prison sentences of up to 10 years and a fine. Unfortunately, there's no requirement of intent to cause harm or actual harm stemming from the prohibited conduct. And so your intentions here don't really play a role. This echoes what Corey was saying earlier this morning with DMCA. And so terms of service, like why is this such a big deal? And I may be overstepping my bounds here, but I imagine many of us are violating terms of service every day without even realizing it. So some of the obvious things from terms of service, like no automated collection. So the top here is from Facebook. It says you cannot use automated means such as harvesting bots, robots, spiders, or scrapers, etc. On the bottom, we've got Pokemon Go. Essentially the same thing, including but not limited to the Pokestop database and other information about users and gameplay. In addition to automated collection, they don't want you to be able to create these sock puppets that we talk about. So you can't manipulate identifiers in order to disguise the origin of any content transmitted through the Twitch service. So if you want to do something regional, you can't do that. You can't impersonate or misrepresent your affiliation with another person or entity. Even more confusing is some cases, in this case specifically, they ban manual collection of data. So here, again, there's Spider, the deep link, no scrapers, or other automated means, methodology, algorithm, or device, or any manual process for any purpose. I don't even know what that means. I can't begin to explain that. But one might interpret this as just sitting down in front of a computer, taking a pen and paper and just writing something down, and that would be a violation. Some other things that you cannot do, reverse engineering. Bunny talked about that earlier a bit this morning. And one of the other reasons why this makes us so frustrating is because terms of service are not static. For example, this company, FrontApp, reserves a right to update and modify terms of use at any time without notice. So just by going to that website, you agree to the terms of service. Again, and I apologize for the many Pokemon Go references, in this case, unless you opt out, you basically give up your right to trial by jury or to participate as a plaintiff or a class member in any purported class action or representative proceeding with the site, just by going to this. And who knows to opt out? Because how many of you have ever read the terms of service before you've played Pokemon Go? So, why is this so important? Researchers, journalists, everybody essentially, is affected by this. As an instructor, as a lecturer, as a professor, I care a lot about protecting my students in classes and hackathons doing research. This violating terms of service in many cases can lead to unpublishable work. You can spend years and years on a dissertation and possibly not be able to publish it. There's inconsistencies in who publishes, who doesn't, or who allows one person to publish and doesn't allow somebody else to publish with same methodologies. ARB may not approve of your work. Your reputation could be at stake. Finding employment. Let's say you want to work at Facebook, but something gets in the way, maybe because of a study that you did. Research funding that comes up a lot, so I won't belabor that point. But I do want to start briefly talking about the importance of norms before I end. And norms are crucial here because I mentioned earlier that lots of computer scientists scrape, lots of computer scientists use bots, and they've done this for social good. And discussions are happening. And last year, there was an amazing event here called Freedom to Innovate. And I was a little frustrated at the time about ACM and how their professional code of conduct forbidded you violating terms of service, essentially. I'm ecstatic to announce that, because of Amy Bruckman and her peers, Amy Bruckman from Georgia Tech, for those of you who don't know, there now exists, as of just a few weeks ago, the new ACM SIGCHI Ethics Committee. Again, the goal of the committee is not to resolve ethical issues. It's not a court, but it's to facilitate shared understanding emerging from the community. And they're addressing the fact that what the community does matters and what the community cares about matters. That said, going back and forth, it was hard to come up with a system of goals. CFA violations are happening. Research do not want to articulate this, but they are happening, and discussions are happening online and in blogs. And one of the things that Amy writes in her blog that I highly recommend is that maybe documenting what you do is not so smart with respect to terms of service because, as her friend Mako Hill noted, that could get people in more trouble. It asks people to document their intent to break terms of service. Under some circumstances, breaking terms of service is ethical, yet not strategic. And so these discussions are happening offline. They're happening in blogs. And it's nice that the community is starting to come together to discuss this. And like I said, they've always faced ethical questions. And we have frameworks to address them in the face-to-face world. Given conversations with industry, with the government, with researchers, we can find frameworks to address them in the online world as well. And the approach that we're finally going towards right now is policy change, policy creation. We've tried talking to individual companies. We've tried asking for data. And we really hope that this next step forward helps formalize, not just us, but everybody knowing what they can do online.
Thank you very much for that, Carrie and Alexandra. We'll take a little bit of time to chat with each other. And I'll just note that in many cases, Alexandra will be speaking to us via Russian, and we have a lovely translator who will be then translating her words into English. So that will set the pace of our conversation. I'm really fascinated by the different ways in which the two of you have been disobedient in respect to the law. Like Carrie, on one hand, you have these legal risks around the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You both have this situation where there are common practices, like researchers are scraping, people are constantly violating these terms, but maybe doing it under the radar. And in your case, Carrie, you're disobeying by participating in this lawsuit to try to change the rules. You're participating in professional societies like the Association for Computer Machinery to make this widespread practice perhaps have fewer legal risks. While on Alexandra's side, there's a very different kind of response. The answer is to kind of build on this kind of breadth of other platforms, other efforts that people are doing to also share research and build a system that does it even more effectively and in a more widespread way. I'm curious to hear both of you, maybe Carrie first and then Alexandra, talk about how you see the kind of established institutions and your relationship to the rules, to the kind of powers that be, in your case, the companies, the law, the research organizations, and in Alexandra, in your case, how you see the work of Sci-Hub in relation to the academic publishing industry.
So with respect to the university, companies, colleagues, you complain a lot and you end up on committees to do something about it. So for example, institutional review boards, there's lots of complaints about should they have any jurisdiction over any legal issues or just ethical issues. And many would argue that the ethical is orthogonal to the legal and IRB should stick to the ethical and not the legal. By doing that, I ended up on the IRB board. Which was surprisingly, maybe not surprising, it was very rewarding. I hope I had some impact. It was nice to see studies, specifically in computer science, that could get approved in a day versus 6 to 9 months the way it was before.
Carrie, can you help us, for those of us who are less familiar with IRB, can you tell us what that is and what that role that plays in the story?
Sorry. Institutional review boards exist at many universities. Originally, they were put in place so that anyone who received federal funding had ethical approval for any research that they did with government money. In most research institutions, IRB approval needs to be obtained for any research study that happens, regardless of whether it's funded by the US government or not. So if somebody wants to do a study, before they can do any studies with a human subject, they have to file an application. This goes to the board. It gets reviewed. Some boards meet every month. Some have expedited reviews that might happen on a weekly basis. But you need to get IRB approval before you do any study. If you're caught not having IRB approval, the entire institution could be shut down and all research stopped until the situation is remedied. And so it was nice to see an opening discussion at the university level with IRB and how they were helping us move research forward. With respect to working with individual organizations, we've had mixed results there. We wanted to work with one specific company, and we tried to be nice. We asked them, we don't have a lot of data that we need. Instead of wasting your time and our time collecting this data, can you just give it to us? And we'll promise not to touch your servers ever again. They said no. That led to people not wanting to ask again, because once you get that no, it makes it even worse to actually go and collect it after officially having that no answer. I've had great discussions, like moving along to bigger corporations. I've had great discussions with the data scientists at Facebook. They're among one of the best groups that I've ever interacted with, and they've been very supportive of our work. However, the plan to get the data to us did not come to pass, and that's not anything to do with the data scientists. It had to do with the organization as a whole and legal issues in a big corporation that I honestly don't understand. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we try to do our due diligence, and we feel like we've knocked on many different doors, and we needed a new one to try to stop having to knock on all of these doors.
Which is where the legal case comes in.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Alexandra, often when people discuss your work with Sci-Hub, their first reactions are to rehash the open access debates and think immediately about their own institutions, their own context, their own countries and cultures. But it strikes me that Sci-Hub is very much an outsider project for people who find them outside of those structures. Do you have a vision for changing the publishing industry? Or do you see yourself as just serving the people who are accessing and sharing articles through your resource?
Так. Ну, я думаю, Сайхаб, он в любом случае, как бы если он продолжит работу успешную, то в любом случае придется издательствам подстраиваться. Потому что, ну, а как иначе? Они же не смогут больше зарабатывать такие огромные деньги на продаже подписок. Вот. И, ну, а что касается, как бы, ну, лично мне вот просто как человеку, я, в принципе, поддерживаю движение Open Access, мне это все импонирует, и я стараюсь продвигать это через сайт Сайхаб. Ну, а что касается наших пользователей, то некоторые удивляются, а зачем как бы этот Open Access, надо через Сайхаб все качать, да и все, что там продвигать вроде. Ну, такие, ну, хотя вот я не очень согласна, что в основном это аутсайдерский проект, потому что все-таки, ну, большинство пользователей, как мне показалось, это все-таки академические ученые.
Alexandra, if you could allow us some pauses in the middle of your responses so our translator has a chance to catch up with you, that would be great. But if you're able to give a try on that.
So I think that in terms of Sci-Hub, if it continues to exist, I think that the scientific publishing industry will have to adjust because they will not be able to gain the huge profits they're gaining right now from subscriptions. If you ask my personal opinion about open access, I'm for it. I'm trying to promote it.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
I'm curious about this dynamic that's in play in both of these situations where we have a large number of people already doing the thing. And to some sense, both you, Carrie, and you, Alexandra, have become like more visible on these issues because you're trying to address the problem in a systemic or a large-scale way. How has that been? Maybe, Alexandra, to start out, did you expect that attention? And has that changed how you do your work at Sci-Hub?
Так, ну надо сказать, что к Сайхабу было сразу, с момента его создания, довольно много внимания, но это в первую очередь от локального сообщества. Просто мировые СМИ об этом не писали, но могу сказать, что и так было много достаточно пользователей.
Well, I have to say that from the very beginning of Sci-Hub's existence, there was a lot of attention paid to it, but you might not know it because it was largely covered by local media and maybe not so much by international media.
And Alexandra, you've also, in the United States, faced legal action from US publishers. How does that affect you as someone not living in the United States? How does that affect Sci-Hub as well?
Так, ну, конечно, так как Sci-Hub пиратский ресурс, то есть определенные сложности, например, с той же регистрацией доменов. Например, у нас домен Sci-Hub.org отняли через суд, но для некоторых доменов и хостингов даже не обязательно будет в суд подавать, то есть могут просто так выгнать. Поэтому с этим есть, например, проблемы.
For obvious reasons, there are a lot of challenges like domain registration. For example, our scihub.org domain was closed down and through a legal action, but for some other resources, it's not even necessary to take a legal action.
Thank you.
Ну, естественно, я не путешествую в Америку, Европу.
And obviously,
соблюдая осторожность.
I'm not going to the United States or Europe. I'm trying to be cautious about it.
Well, we're very grateful that you're able to speak to us from where you are right now. I'm curious, Carrie, part of your legal strategy involves inviting other researchers who found themselves limited from doing this work or who faced those challenges and asking them actually to come forward. Are you able to tell us more about what that entails and why people might find that difficult or why they should?
Yeah, well, it's similar to Amy Bruckman's blog post in a way. My colleague Christian Sandvik put out a call on Facebook asking people to share their stories. When I talk to the media, they always ask me to find more people, and there's many people. It's not my job to out them. However, I know many colleagues that have done this work, have gotten cease and desist letters, have stopped doing the work in most cases, but people don't want to come out and admit this. They'll talk about it in small circles, but they definitely don't want to announce it to the public for fear that there might be something to come out of it. And I can tell you that, at least in our university, 6 out of my 8 PhD students are not US citizens. I work with many faculty members who are not US citizens. For any of you that have had students who struggle, getting a visa every year or whose visa gets revoked for unexplained reasons, it's very hard to admit to doing anything like this. It's hard to ask a student to do anything like this.
Thank you. We have time for just 1 or 2 questions. So if you're able, please come up to the microphones in the middle and on the sides, and I'll acknowledge you, and you'll just want to allow some time for the video and the translation. Here on the left.
Thank you. So I had a question about these terms of service, because I feel like Pokemon Go isn't telling you not to scrape their data because they don't want you to identify a racial bias in the stops, right? It's because they're protecting their commercial interests. And I'm curious what sort of changes you think can be made to change those commercial interests, so that you don't need to worry about, so that they might not be as strict about enforcing the terms of service, or might have different terms of service and try to get at the problem a few steps back.
I'm sorry, can you rephrase?
So perhaps, for example, if the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act relies on terms of service, theoretically, if you could just get companies to change their terms of service, that might allow researchers to audit them and maybe hold them accountable. Is that a viable strategy?
And and then also sort of changing the commercial forces that motivate the companies to set the terms of service like that.
That's an excellent point. One of the things that we've noted is that lots of terms of service are cut and pasted from literally other terms of service. And so there seems to be like a template that people start out with and then just add to. So that's an approach we have not tried. I have not talked to a company and asked them to change their terms of service. I've talked to lots of scientists, and I'm told that the lawyers do not want to touch the terms of service, and the terms of service need to be there. So I might ask a lawyer about that question. They're probably more educated to answer that than I am. My attempts to talk to data scientists always end up going to lawyers, and they stop there.
One more question here.
So first of all, Alexandra, thanks for the great work that you've done for the community. Now, I've been wondering whether you get any support from academia itself for your website, and in particular from the top institutions like MIT, so the ones that actually do have the access. But do you feel like that academia is supporting your actions? And since I anticipate that the answer is no, do you think that there is something that these institutions could and should do, and that extends to the panel other panel members as well? Like, do you think somehow universities could leverage their power to to help in these cases and to promote the causes that we care about? Thanks.
Так. Ну, я буду делать небольшие паузы в ответе.
Well, I'll try to take pauses while I'm answering this.
Ну, во-первых, в MIT плохой довольно доступ к литературе. Ну, по крайней мере, я знаю, что пользователи, которые пользуются iHub, они жаловались на доступ к MIT.
Well, first of all, I think that MIT has poor access to publications, or allows poor access to publications. At least that's what the frequent user complaint was.
Вот. Потом, ну, насчет поддержки, ну, поддержка определенная, я считаю, есть. То есть нету, по крайней мере, противодействия. Ну, а что касается рядовых пользователей, то многие из них работают или учатся в университетах, и они поддерживают сайт пожертвованиями. Ну, конечно, на официальном уровне поддержки нет. Но это, я думаю, обусловлено как бы, ну, законным статусом проекта.
Second, as far as support is concerned, I think that there is support on the part of the users who make donations, but obviously there is no official support for obvious legal reasons.
Well, please join me in thanking Alexandra and Carrie for a fascinating conversation and panel.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Alexandra, for joining with us. We are now going to take a 10-minute coffee break. We're going to come back. We're nearing the end. I realize people's brains are already getting full. Thank you for hanging out with us. There's more wonderful stuff to come. We'll see you in about 10 minutes, and don't make me bring out the bell.